Schizoaffective disorder is a combination of depression. Brian had been so depressed at times that he wasn't getting out of bed, and he was sleeping through classes, and he was sleeping through rehearsals. And schizophrenia, psychosis. Brian had been hearing voices. And he had been dealing with this since February of his freshman year in college. Somehow, from February of freshman year until November of senior year, he had been able to maintain a high GPA, become president of all these groups, become that star, but all the while he was suffering immensely inside. And it wasn't until November of his senior year that he told anybody about it. He had hid it all from me, his kid sister, from our really supportive family, my mom, who's a social worker. He even hid it from his friends, and though we found out later that his friends had actually noticed some changes in him, but they didn't say anything during those few years because they didn't really know what to say. They didn't think it was their place to say anything, so they didn't say anything. So we found out after he came home and he took this leave of absence that he had been dealing with this for so long. He stayed in intensive treatment for a while. We learned a little bit more about what it had been like for him in school. Like most people with psychosis, none of Brian's voices was dangerous. But we learned that there were times that the voices had told him to pack up his dorm room in boxes. And so he had. And he ended up sleeping on the streets of New York for a few nights at a time. If anybody's ever been to Columbia, there's a building on Columbia's campus called Low Library, which has something like 3 stories worth of stairs getting up to it. And a couple of times the voices had told him to walk up and down the streets, walk up and down the stairs of Low Library. And so he had for hours at a time. This was all during his time in college. He was away from home. He was away from us. We had no idea what was going on. Not until he took this leave of absence and came home. Again, I'm a senior in high school and all this is happening. I don't get it. I don't really understand. What I did understand though, and if anybody's ever experienced mental health issues in your family, you may understand this too. When Brian came home, it almost was like my big brother had become my younger brother. Brian's depression had gotten to a point where, in a way, it felt like he had lost hope. He was normally this really outgoing, gregarious, funny guy who, years ago had been going out with his friends, and I'd be the little kid sister, hey, can I go out with you? And then all of a sudden he came home, and I had to cajole him out of his room. Or I had to be like, hey, Brian, you want to go out tonight? Or I'm going out with my friends, do you want to go get a Slurpee at 7-Eleven? That's all we did. Do you want to do something? And he just changed. With his treatment, we were able to successfully control the psychosis and the voices. As I said, he remained in really intensive treatment, both talk therapy and medications, trying to work out different cocktails and trying to work out different combinations that would work for him. But we were never really able to control that hopelessness that he felt with the depression that he experienced. So we finished out my senior year of high school. Brian was still at home. He had started taking guitar lessons. He had actually taken a job at the Washington Post, doing some writing for the Post, and he became obsessed with watching reruns after reruns after reruns of The Simpsons. And this was before there was DVR. He would actually put in a cassette, tape The Simpsons, watch it, put in another one. I mean, this was old school. And he had with all of them on tape because he loved The Simpsons so much. I graduated from high school. Went off to college at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, which wasn't too far from DC. I needed to get away from home, but I didn't want to go too far because I still didn't really get it. I still didn't really understand what was going on, other than the fact that my big brother was at home. I had graduated from high school. His college friends had graduated. His high school friends that had gone to different colleges had graduated, and he was still at home. And he had been this star, and this just didn't make any sense to me. I went off to college in Philadelphia, did my thing. I started as a psychology major, wasn't quite sure what I wanted to major in. I came back for spring break, I remember it well. I was actually a cheerleader in college, and being at Penn, the Ivy League gets an automatic berth to the NCAA basketball tournament every year. At the time I was there, Penn was a big powerhouse. I don't think they've won a game since I left, but they were a big powerhouse, and so we got to go to tournament every year that I was there. So I came back for spring break, kind of rubbed it in Brian's face that I got to go to tournament. He was the one that actually liked basketball. I really couldn't have cared less. He was the one that liked sports. He's the one that liked college sports, and here I was getting to go to tournament. That was the kind of banter that we always maintained. So I came home from break, had this, kind of rubbed it in his face, had him drive me back up to the train station so I could go back up to Philly, and then I can go to tournament that week. Went to tournament, we lost. But I bought myself a t-shirt. I bought Brian a t-shirt. I called him up and I said, hey, Brian, I have a t-shirt for you. Haha, I'm here. I'm watching Duke play and you're watching it on TV. I went back to school and 4 days later I got a call from my mom that Brian had taken his own life. I still have that t-shirt today. It still sits in my dresser. I can't describe to you in words the horror or the anguish or the grief that I feel and my family and I feel. And we felt then and we continue to feel to this day. It's been just over 10 years since Brian took his life. For anybody who's experienced a suicide, you may understand what this feels like. There's the hurt, there's the devastation, there's anger. It all comes and goes, different parts of a process, different waves of emotion. Everybody in my family has grieved differently. It's looked a little bit different for us each year. But what I can tell you is now, just over 10 years later, it does get a little bit easier every year. And what gets easier is learning how to live with the loss. I lost my big brother, my other half. I'm an only child now. I have divorced parents who were divorced before he died, but I've always had to figure out, okay, what's my place in this world now? But I've been able to figure it out a little bit more each time. And so if you've experienced a suicide, if you were one of these people who stood up before I got up to speak, know that it can and it will continue to get a little bit easier each year. But I can tell you, as I was thrown into this as a happy-go-lucky college freshman, I think I experienced every emotion possible. But what really stood out for me the most was how scared I became. Because I got scared realizing that Brian and I were really similar people. If it had been me who started experiencing a depression or hearing voices in my freshman year, I probably would have kept it quiet too. We found out that Brian kept it quiet because he was scared, he was ashamed, he was embarrassed. So many of the words that we used at the beginning of this presentation, he thought he could pull himself out of it. He didn't think he needed anybody else to help him. And more importantly, he thought he was the only one going through this and that he was just being weak. Everybody else around him was living the ideal happy college life, and why wasn't he? And it was his own fault. So I dove into research, didn't really know what to do with myself, and I found out that what Brian experienced was not any different than what many college students experience. Mental health issues affect people young and old, blonde and brunette, male, female, transgender, everything in between. We have this notion that it's just the quote-unquote crazy people in the streets, or it's the quote-unquote crazy mentally ill people who commit crimes that we see in the news and the media. When in fact, 1 in 4 of us deals with a mental health issue at any given time. A quarter of this room right now, a quarter of us are dealing with a mental health issue. And if that's the case, then every one of us has a story. And every one of us has experienced mental health in ourselves or our family at some point in our lives. Numbers show that there are 18 million Americans who live with depression right now. To put that into perspective, that's the same number as live with diabetes. How much do we talk about diabetes? How much do we know about diabetes? You don't ever look at somebody who's giving themselves insulin and say, whoa, you're weak. Why can't your body produce insulin? Geez, it's your fault. But we do that with depression for some reason. Why is that? I also found out that the age of onset of most mental health issues is actually exactly the high school and the college age. The fact that Brian first started hearing voices when he was 18 was not that unique. 75% of people with schizophrenia develop it between the ages of 15 and 25. Half of people with depression, half of those 18 million adults who have depression, report onset before the age of 20. 30% of college-age women display behaviors evident of an eating disorder. 30%. 1.5% of us have seriously contemplated suicide. And there's this recent study that shows that nearly half, 46% of college students report having felt so depressed in the past year it was difficult to function. Half of us have felt so depressed in the past year it was difficult to function. It was also then that I learned that suicide is the second leading cause of death for college students. The second leading cause of death for college students. The fact that I lost my college-age brother to suicide was not all that unique. We have over 1,100 college students who die by suicide each year. That is a huge, huge number. But nobody was talking about it.